Yo, 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 what's good? What's happening?
Good. Hold up.
Welcome to a special episode of the Footnotes podcast. We're coming to you live at 12:07 p.m. Eastern Time. Um, June has a little something special tonight, so we had to move this event. But why don't you tell us what you're doing tonight, June? You haven't told me really.
Oh yeah. So I'm going to a BTS concert.
What's BTS?
Yeah, BTS, in case you haven't heard of them, they're a group of seven very talented and I guess attractive, not for me, but for other people, young Korean men who dance and sing together. And they're doing a world tour right now. And they have three concerts in Hamilton, which is very surprising.
That is surprising. Is it
Yeah.
all in the same venue
Yes.
on
And
3 days?
yeah, so tonight is the last night.
Interesting.
Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. And the long story as to like how I ended up getting the tickets, it's complicated, but I'm ending up going. 3 days ago I didn't know that I'd be going, but now I'm going.
Yeah, I feel like this was a very in the moment kind of decision. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know you were such a big BTS fan.
Well, the thing is I wasn't, and my one of my friends, one of my roommates actually kind of encouraged a YOLO spontaneous decision out of me. So I'm going.
Okay.
And I wanted to enjoy my time there as much as possible.
Okay.
So I've been just like listening to a lot of BTS, like looking at the lyrics. I'm actually very impressed. Like I can, because they're probably the most popular Korean boy band in the world right now.
Mm.
And I can see why. Like one thing is their music, their sound is like very, let's say, attuned for a global audience.
Okay.
Um, they're very hardworking. They're known for their like extremely synchronized, like even in K-pop, they're extremely synchronized and what they call it knife choreography. That's the
Ooh.
literal translation from Korean, kalgunmu, which
Mm.
means like choreography so exact it's like as if it's cut by a knife.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like I can see why they're big. I also really like their lyrics.
Okay.
They talk about some like pretty deep and unusual things in their lyrics, which I like. Um,
Oh.
yeah, I think, and I've seen one of their interviews. It's one of the members is like, we want to relate to like the young people in the world right now, and he thinks that to an extent like worldwide, young people are going through similar developmental struggles, like living
Mm.
in this hyper connected, brave new world.
Wow.
So there's a lot of like very encouraging lyrics. There's a lot of yeah, like hope, and it's I think I'm getting more into them.
Well, it's interesting because I know they probably didn't write it themselves, right? There's like producers behind the scene
Yeah, there
writing.
there are a lot of producers, but the other thing that's great about them is that they write a lot of their own songs
Mm.
or a
Right.
few members.
Well, what I wanted to get at was like that's sort of like the voice of Korea, right? It's like it is many people, many Koreans coming together to make art and to
Uh-huh.
send this out globally. So I'm not surprised that there's like a lot of meaning behind these lyrics and a lot of work and effort put into it. I'm actually looking up one right now. So here's the here's the
Uh-huh.
problem that I have. I can't read Korean well enough to actually know what it says.
Uh-huh.
So I'm reading the English translations,
Of which
and
song?
well, this one's called Spring Day, 봄날.
Oh yeah, and spring day is really interesting too because as I'm listening to their lyrics, they have a lot of like consistent themes that come up. And
Okay.
one of their, I guess, deeper themes is coming and going of seasons.
Mm.
And this one, they're comparing. It's like their love for another. It's very distant and cold and wintry right now.
Right.
But spring will come. That's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It seems that way, huh?
but this theme kind of repeats in other songs that they write too, which I find really interesting.
Hmm. Okay. BTS.
Yeah.
So my question to you is,
Yeah.
so who got you into this? Can you share names here?
I mean, I like BTS to me is just like pop music that I listen to in the background. Like K-pop is just pop to me, right? Because like I
Yeah.
listen to it when I work out. I like listen to it. I don't know, just when I'm going somewhere. So I've always
Right.
like heard them and like known of them in the background.
Okay. But you've never like analyzed their lyrics as you've done now.
Yeah, and I'm not really analyzing them. I was just looking them over to get more familiar with them, so I can sing along at the concert and have a better time.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but
That's so
in
important.
the meantime, while doing that, I found that the lyrics are quite meaningful, and then
Mm.
they're I think they're a thoughtful and very hardworking bunch.
Mm.
So I like
They
them.
also have some they also have some Japanese versions of their songs as well, which is
Yeah.
a very recent K-pop thing to do.
Mhm.
More along the lines of that globalization. Do they have English lyrics as well mixed in?
Yes.
I'm sure.
Lots.
Very nice.
Hmm.
That's tonight.
Yeah.
That is tonight. Um, you're gonna have to update us when after you've seen it. Is
I'm,
it
mhm.
like I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people at the actual concert.
Yeah.
Are your seats good?
Yeah. I have really good seats. The other thing I want to talk about is, yeah, there's such a like crazy fandom around
Yes.
around these groups, right? And especially BTS. I don't know if you read the CBC articles of people lining up in Hamilton, like in front of the concert stadium, like 24 hours before the event.
My God.
For people who are on the ground floor, that's to, get the closest seats to their oppas.
Yeah.
And so like I don't feel like a fan at all. I'm like I can't even call myself a BTS fan compared to how devoted and closely other people follow them. And the other interesting thing about them too is that they have like such a transparent social media um, and such a they're so active on social media and other forms of like media that capture their day-to-day lives, that fans can really dig into their lives.
Mm.
And so I thought this was a really interesting phenomenon. It's a cult. It's a cult
It's a cult,
at some level.
right? And I am gonna be honest. I am a little turned off by the cult.
Uh-huh.
Um, whenever I think about K-pop, I just think about the fandom immediately, and the stuff that you see on the news, and
Uh-huh.
the crazy screaming and the oppas and things like that. And that actually genuinely scares me. It genuinely scares me that anyone could be so excited about these Korean boys who, like, a lot of these people don't even understand the language or anything, but they still relate somehow. It's truly phenomenal. It's another religion, honest.
Mhm. But like what I was thinking about the other day was, like in the absence of like many things to worship or look up to, like these people are not, it's not the worst
Right,
to kind of worship and look up to.
right.
Because I think they have very good intentions, like as people, they're
Mm.
very admirable. Their lyrics are very unique and thoughtful.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I mean, they're very hardworking. They have a lot going for them, and they're also very attractive. So
It works out.
I'm I don't have such a bad, let's say, view on them.
Right.
Like it gets problematic when you establish your cult and then you have competing other cults that you get kind of tribal with. You see that in YouTube comments,
Mm.
fandoms fighting between one another.
Tribes. Oh my God.
Yeah, but like within the group, it's like such a warm community. Like I was
Right.
watching a YouTube video about like the BTS concerts in Korea and what that experience is like. And then you have people who it's a common practice to like pack a bunch of stickers and print out photos of BTS and other snacks and kind of give them out to other BTS fans as like loot bags while they're waiting in line and kind of
Huh.
sharing that like between all the fans. And
Right.
yeah, so there's those kind of like practices that develop around this community.
Mm.
And I don't know, in this day and age, I think that's a sufficient and pretty good way to find a sense of belonging
Mm.
and do some kind of worship.
Well, as Friedrich Nietzsche has always said, or has said, God is dead, but now we have K-pop. So we're
Yeah.
all good.
I mean, it's like an incomplete replacement, but I don't think it's the worst thing. That's my view at the moment. Maybe I'm just being slowly sucked into the cult.
Well, I just find it surprising that you have this view of them as like hardworking and well intentioned. When I don't know where you've got that impression from. Like, is it from their music? Is it just from how they've portrayed themselves in the media?
Yeah,
like
no,
you've never met them,
just
right?
from their lyrics. And
Right.
I know that they write their own lyrics. A few of them especially are like songwriters and produce music themselves. So
There you go.
I found that very impressionable.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, on the note of new experiences, I recently went bouldering. This is a bit of a change from something like K-pop, but first time I went bouldering. For those who don't know what bouldering is, it's like rock climbing without the rope, but you don't go as high up, so you're not at risk of hurting yourself. The challenge mostly is navigating through the different rocks and trying to get up using these little crevices and little weird rocks in the wall. And it was nice because I was able to conquer all the beginner ones. So there's like 8 levels of bouldering. I was able to conquer level 2. Level 1 is for like children, so it doesn't count. But what I found was the most interesting was how scared I was in the beginning. It was just like I was terrified. It was just frightening. But as soon as you kind of start to get through it and have a few experiences and fall down a number of times, you start to feel a lot better and get more confident. So those are the kind of experiences that I'm looking for, that overcoming the fear and being able to master something. Okay, not master, but master my own fears quickly and with purpose. So that was a notable event this week. Definitely don't think I can extend that to something like K-pop, to be honest with you. I'm still very scared of those fandoms. But hey, at least I did something new this week, which was nice.
Did you go with people?
I did go with one of my housemates. He took me. He's experienced, but he couldn't do any of the harder ones either. So that made me feel good as well. Yeah.
I think there's a pretty active community around rock climbing and bouldering. I'm wondering if you'll be one of them. doing?
Well, I woke up this morning with some hand cramps, and I wasn't able to feel my calves.
Oh my.
So I'd be an active participant in this community. It's actually kind of costly for me to get there as well, and to do it. It's quite a bus ride down, but
Where did you do it?
it's downtown London. Uh, McMaster has a climbing wall uh, at the school, which is actually quite the blessing. I have to say. I'd tell you to make use of it. You can't really boulder there, but I mean, you can kind of climb around in the lower ends. Um, but yeah, things you take for granted, eh? Things that you didn't know were so valuable and precious when you leave. Like for example, Coots. I miss Coots Paradise at McMaster.
Uh-huh.
You know, I really enjoyed that place. Haven't found anything like that here.
I mean, I haven't been for maybe a year or two.
To Coots?
Yeah, but maybe I should take the time to go.
Yeah. Well, for you, maybe you would want to explore something else because you're there, and it's
Yeah.
always available. So I don't know. It's like you don't take advantage of it as much. Um, what's kind of cool is when the water freezes over and
Uh-huh.
you go behind one of the residences. I think around Hedden LP, and the water has frozen over, and you can walk on that lake. Um, Yeah, and it's kind of scary. It's like borderline. You're walking on the border of order and chaos, whatever. Um, but it's a neat little experience. I did that once in my third year. Um, I recommend. You can get pretty far.
I will try it out. And hopefully you hear back from me.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I do. Um,
I that reminds me that I probably haven't spent as much time in nature as I'd like to.
mhm.
Do you spend a lot of time in nature?
um, Again, not as much as I like to. But recently I started walking to school a bit more. Like I stopped. Like I just look forward and like I'm tunnel visioned. I need to get to my destination, but when I'm walking, I can take in the view and look around a bit more. And I just thought to myself, I love this planet. Yeah, and it's something I wanna sustain and keep up. And I started picking up like litter and recycling that I saw on the way to school and on the way back, and something about it it helps me feel more connected to the world. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been like, oh my god, this tree hugging nonsensical like hippie mentality. But now as I get older, as I mature, I just feel a more I guess, and appreciation for beauty and for nature. So
Yeah. No, I I felt that too, and I think it was last weekend when we went on the Blue Mountain retreat. So
mhm.
we went to the beach near Blue Mountain, and it was like a perfect day, and very mild weather. The sun was shining, and just right next to the water, the beach, like trees around. It's like so beautiful and so habitable.
Mhm.
And like as you grow older and as you see more of the world, you realize like how rare that is.
Mhm.
How rare that is, like for the like for those conditions to be there and for the people to be there, to have enough to feed themselves, to live, and to like appreciate that.
Mm.
So I think I took some moments to like take in, that moment,
Mhm.
because that was really nice for me.
Mhm. I went to there's a club within our med school. It's called Earth. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's called Earth, and you could probably guess what it stands for, but it's about sustainability and taking care of our planet. And in the meeting, we watched a Vice documentary on one of the most polluted cities in the world. It's in China, Linfen, I think it was called. Very, I'll fact check that later, but very polluted. They depend on coal manufacturing, coal processing, and they use a lot of coal to transport the coal out of the city to other places. So there's constant smog over the city. And documentary, particularly the most striking thing for me was when there were kids playing out and they saw like these dark black clouds floating, hovering over the city, looming over them, and they just didn't care. They just went about their day because it's just a normal thing to see. And I thought to myself, how can people get to a point where they're okay with so much pollution, with all the terrible health outcomes that come with it, but also just the smell, the odor, and how not beautiful it is, seeing that taking over the city. I don't understand how that could happen. Maybe it was like a slow process of getting more and more habituated with pollution as it grew and grew. But man, I wish I could just take those people, send them somewhere else with nice clean air, trees and whatnot, and have them experience that for a month, and then maybe they could go back and fix things. But obviously it's not that easy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen one one show while I was in Korea. It was talking about the economic progress and development of China, and over the past few years, China has actually made pretty remarkable strides in terms of reducing pollution and shifting over to sustainable energy. Like when I went to Shanghai, in 2011, I couldn't see the sun for 10 days straight. It was just smoggy and cloudy. And when I finally saw the sun, we went to a mountainous region, and we literally had to go above the clouds to see the sun. And that was oh my God. But now they've heavily subsidized electric vehicles, especially electric scooters, in the main cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and if they were just smog-filled metropolis kind of cities a few years ago, now they're actually very clean, and they're sustaining, or they're investing a lot in sustainable energy, and so they're experiencing a lot of, let's say, not as detrimental to the environment kind of growth.
Right.
Yeah. So hopefully some of that smog has cleared. But yeah, the environment problem, it's tough because we have our own needs, and we have we're very needy in terms of energy demand. Modern people, we have to fuel all our devices, all our cars. We have to travel to thousands of kilometers away. We have to we kind of demand food at all times, from all places, from regardless of season, which is it's kind of crazy, right? And there's a lot of energy that goes into sustain that, and it just happens so that we have very concentrated still remaining, which is very easy and convenient. And what I was thinking when you were saying how could they make coal plants when the world is so beautiful? I was thinking in the back of my head, well, Paul, that's because money is very beautiful too. The things you can get with money, it's a different kind of beauty. I don't know what it is, but it's very seductive. anyways,
Well,
like we
it's
have all these
yeah.
energy needs and demands, and um, I
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we can have a mass like percentage of a critical percentage of people just reverting back to a minimalistic lifestyle. Although like some conscious people, and I think there are a growing number, will try to cut back on their energy use and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been a more of a big believer in like the role that technologies can play.
Mm-hmm.
Especially listening to like the Joe Rogan podcast with Elon Musk.
Mm.
Yeah, and he was saying how just like so much. I think he said something like the majority of home energy usage comes from the using the like AC and a heating system, and there's so much
Mm-hmm.
inefficiency because well technology could improve it if it could tailor it to just when you get back home, like just the rooms that need it and that you'll be staying in. But right now it's kind of a general like heat up the whole place, like cool down the whole place regardless of time and
Mm-hmm.
conditions. So just like minor fixes like that for every home, having a smart thermostat could
Mm-hmm.
take the energy use way down. Like Elon Musk is trying to develop um, like portable batteries for homes, for cars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we have that, giant fusion reactor called the sun that's running, I guess 12/7 at most times.
12/7.
Yeah. So better take advantage of that reactor before uh,
Mm.
it's gone in a few billion years.
Mm. It's
Yeah.
it's an interesting thought because the perspective you're taking is my lifestyle when I can just make things that'll allow me to sustain the lifestyle. And then the alternative is why not change our lifestyle so that we can suit the resources that we have. And I think there's a middle ground somewhere that we can find. I think I think your perspective is mostly Western, maybe. I'm gonna make some huge claims here. Maybe that's the Western perspective, and that's maybe why that there's actually no. I take that back. I think it's just a more progressive way of looking at things. It's to more developments in technology, and it pushes us forward. And then perhaps the other more holistic approach to life, it sort of squanders our potential a bit, doesn't it? Like it asks us to limit our own behavior and to take a step back. And while it's effective in, I think, small quantities, it can be very limiting and stop us from reaching our full potential. So for me, as a personal advocate for the environment now, all of a sudden, um, I I'm going to do the best I can personally to limit my usage of resources because I think in doing so I can allow people who are uh, keen on making technologies or building new ways of utilizing energy more efficiently. It'll allow them the space to go about making those technologies. So my role, because I'm in medicine and I'm not involved in developing those, my role is to just lower my footprint, um, my carbon footprint, my energy footprint, whatever it might be, so that there'll be enough of the world to sustain those who make better technologies to improve our lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's definitely things you can do as a consumer. I don't like that word, but consumer to encourage the development of new technologies and create a demand for that,
Mm-hmm.
which is very
Right.
important. But my sense is that like there's billions of people who are, let's say, like getting connected to the power grid, who are living in countries that are going from developing to developed. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be a whole mass of people who are entering, like, let's say, the modern lifestyle. And
Mm-hmm.
I see that as like so much inertia that you can't just be like, but hold up guys, like we gotta slow down and think about your actions. And
Right.
so many of these like high energy products that we have today are so convenient and make our lives easier and better for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Like without refrigeration, like we'd be fucked, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like very simple things, but heating
Right.
and inevitably like that makes life better for people than if they didn't have it
Right.
for most people. So I think
Right.
there's a huge inertia in terms of growing energy demand.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think the role of technologies is going to be really important. But like you said, what's going to spur that is our consciousness about and gratitude for the environment and the kind of beauty that we have a responsibility to preserve.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like a general appreciation for what we have now, a kind of a sorrow for maybe what we've lost.
Mm-hmm.
And but I don't think having such a catastrophic view of the environment necessarily helps. I don't know. I think you can make a pretty good case for the need for drastic action,
Mm-hmm.
but I just think that that takes too much inertia to overcome. Like you could argue that every single person should go back to, planting their own food and I don't know, living in communes where
Mm-hmm.
just take what you need and give back what you can to the earth. And there are people experimenting with those kind of lifestyles.
Right.
And maybe some of what, the fruits of those experiments can be kind of spread to the masses.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think approaching it from trying to motivate behavioral change from fear is such a good idea. I think more based on a gratitude and appreciation for, I don't know, for a life and for nature in general. Maybe that'll.
Right. Well, it's a simple reframing, right? So I'm no way in suggesting that we just like revert back to our prehistoric times,
Yeah.
or even times like 300 years ago. But I do think it's simple for each individual to take at least a little bit more responsibility. Even like I even noticed in my own house, there's a lot of food waste from people not finishing their foods or forgetting that they even bought something and then leaving it. It goes bad and then they throw it away, and then the plastic becomes a waste. The plastic packaging gets to waste. The food gets to waste. The labor that it costs to get that there was like there's so much waste involved in not eating the food that you even buy. So things like that, like I think it's not a terribly difficult thing. I know people have different circumstances, but for me, I think that's one of the simplest ways for us to make a change on the individual level. And I don't think we need a massive cultural change to enact that. I think it's within us, and we have a lot of incentives to do things like that. So saving money is a big cost, a big incentive for people, right? You said the beauty of money. So that's one thing. Another thing that I want to talk about also is like there's no compost system, I guess, set up in London, which I think is crazy. In Hamilton, they have those green boxes and things, right?
I find it hard to believe that.
Oh yeah, no, there's no government-led, like city-led initiative for composting here. They don't take compost, which is crazy, right? Apparently, there's like private companies that do it, but it's not government run. So things like that, like if you'd think those would be simple changes. I know there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but come on, it's 2018. The classic argument. So this is what I mean. Like we don't have to make huge changes to our lifestyles. We just need to make minimal amount of we need to minimize the cost we have on the environment and to sustainability as a whole, just by simple acts that each and every one of us can do. And I think this is a very prominent sort of idea that runs through a lot of people's minds, especially those who are worried about the planet. It's just a matter of bringing it out and, you know, keeping the message, pressing it on. But that's just me. Yeah, that's been incubating in me for like 4 years. As you know, like my housemate Quinn is a huge supporter of sustainability and the environment. So it's finally come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. To be a little like nitpicky, maybe like hyper rationalistic.
Yeah.
Like it could turn out that those simple actions have like maybe, let's say, it's barely a dent on the total impact of like energy consumption that you have. Like it might be the case that our like 1 hour and a half Skype laptop conversations could be like responsible for 50% of our energy use, and we might be just trying to scrape like that 1% from leftover food or something like that. So that's a critique that, you know, I could make, but I think the bigger idea is like you are conscious of there is a problem and you want to there's goodwill involved, and not that goodwill always leads to good results, and well it rarely leads to good results, I think, but
right,
as
on a big enough scale,
first pass approximation, it's not bad. Keep going.
All right. Well, I will keep you updated. I may be lobbying for composts to be set up in London. You might see me in the news in a few years. Medical student. Okay, I'm not going to go there. Medical student becomes a martyr for for compost in London. All right. I think that's enough of that.
Well, speaking of the environment and changing the world.
Oh, wow. Okay, here we go.
Do you want to talk about psychedelics, Paul?
Yeah, that's that totally leads in. What do you have to say?
I mean, I have a lot of things to say. What you're, because I brought this topic up with you a couple of times in the past, and I've been met with, let's say, various levels of resistance. So I just want to gauge your resistance level today.
Okay. Check in here.
Yeah.
I think I haven't changed much from the last time I spoke to you about this. And my philosophy behind it is, if you don't need it, don't take it. And that's my philosophy for all sorts of drugs and like alcohol or substances and stuff like that.
Okay. Don't need it. And that's,
yeah, if you don't need it, don't take it.
And that's a perfectly reasonable, let's say, conservative strategy. Right. Okay. Well, I did tell you a little bit, I think a few podcasts ago about speaking to adults about psychedelics.
Yep, your parents and your family.
To be receptive about it when I kind of explained the history of it a little bit.
Right.
And I think it's a topic that our culture needs to start investigating again. And here's the reason. So the story goes like this: there's psychedelic substances, so compounds and chemicals that have very, like, strange effects on your mind and your consciousness, your perception of time, spiritual experiences, introspection, visual changes, etc., have been around forever. whether it's in the form of psychedelic mushrooms, psychedelic trees and tree branches, or psychedelic algae. There are whatever compounds contain, let's say, molecules that look like serotonin or kind of are morphed from serotonin, seem to have very pronounced effects on how humans experience like our own consciousness. So that's very strange, and we know that the serotonergic system is, in terms of nervous system development, is one of our most ancient. So lobsters, 250 million years, make use of the serotonergic system to feel better about themselves, to place themselves in part of a hierarchy, and to kind of know their sense of place and relationship to others. So we've had serotonin before we've had trees, and so it's a very ancient system that these chemicals are modulating, it seems like. So as long as humans have been around, we've been experimenting with psychedelics. So a lot of the shamanic cultures, virtually all the small, let's say, the formations of religious traditions in human tribes have some kind of psychedelic component to them. So the Hindus seem to have used a form of a mushroom. It's called Amanita muscaria. That's a strain of mushroom they used. And in the Amazon, they have a strain of this weird tree bark and another root of some other plant, a concoction that you have to cook in a very specific way, or else it's like toxic. But they've somehow figured out a way to do that. And it's strange because when you ask them, oh, how did you figure out that recipe? The shamans kind of say, oh, the plants told us how to do it. And it make perfect sense to them. But from Western point of view, that's just mumbo jumbo. And so shamanic and, let's say, pre-religious rituals, even the Greeks and Romans, the cult of Dionysus made use of these strange wines, which historians believe probably weren't wines, but they made use of some kind of psychedelic substance. Even when they went to see the oracle, because in the Greek and Roman myths, you have people going to seek the oracle for advice, and then the oracle in the Temple of Delphi will see visions, and which all sound like something like a psychedelic experience. So these substances have been very deeply entwined in our culture, and this is a kind of a very provocative and speculative idea. But I was listening to a talk called "The Psychedelic Gospels" and how psychedelics may have been involved in like the Judeo-Christian traditions. So I mentioned this to you briefly, but the ancient Jews have a tradition. So when they got out of Egypt and they were wandering in the desert, they would get together and create the structure called the tabernacle. And outside, they perform ritual sacrifices to God, and then they enter this tent-like holy building called the tabernacle. And once you're inside, only the highest of the high priests could enter the Holy of Holies, and that's the room of the tent where you supposedly meet and encounter God. And what was interesting was there's actually a strain of tree that grows around the Middle East that they used in their rituals, and they would burn that wood to create like a to fill that room entirely with the smoke of that wood. And it turns out that wood had that tree has psychedelic, psychoactive compounds in it. So when you smell the incense, it can have those kind of effects. And so they would perform this ritual every year. They would commune with God, and that would redeem them of the sins and wrongdoings that they've done for that year. And so, like, this is a very new area of research, and this guy, his name is Dr. Jerry Brown. He's been lecturing on psychedelics at I think a university in Florida for the past 30 years. But he noticed one day there was an image of a psychedelic mushroom in, let's say, early Christian art. And he got very curious about why that would be there. And so him and his team of researchers visited kind of all the major cathedrals and churches in Europe just to investigate this claim a little more. And they consistently kept finding references to, or finding art of what looked like psychedelic mushrooms, confirmed with like other mycologists, like, is this the shape, is this the kind of like texture, in the most major churches of, you know, Christendom in Europe. And something that kind of led to his credibility in my mind was, he quoted Carl Sagan, the great educator of science, and he said that Carl Sagan once said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So that's why they really took the time to visit, like, throughout all of Europe. They tried to get to Egypt, but the Arab Springs was happening at that time. And consistently they found this pattern, this recurring theme of the psychedelic mushroom in Christian Catholic art. So, like, all this is to say is that the psychedelic experience and these compounds have had maybe a central role in human spiritual life for as long as we've known, and in very different contexts. And I, like, the thoughts that I have around it are that we've probably lost touch with those traditions, and something that I want to do in my life is to investigate that and to see how, if maybe they could be reincorporated into the culture. So that was my rant. I was into. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I love it when people have all this to say, they're so excited, and then at the end they're like, I wonder what thoughts do you have? And it's so hard to respond to that. Well, I feel like the gist of it is that, you know, there's a big history, right? There's a huge history of psychedelic use, and so it's kind of curious why people would be so doubtful about its effects and potentially its harms when it's been such commonplace for so long. So there must have been like some sort of event or something transpired for there to be that doubt to arise. And my guess would be it probably came along with doubts of religion, and also perhaps maybe there were maybe deaths, or, you know what, these are just guesses, but perhaps there was significant harm that came about such a use, and, you know, a lot of people died, or people went crazy because of use of psychedelics. Perhaps maybe it interacted with other substances, or there were other causes that also accompanied the death. But there must have been something to create that doubt. And what I mean to say by this is, now the cultural norm is to doubt drugs, and it's to doubt the usage of most drugs, if not all drugs. I guess depending on where you're raised. But for me, hearing about the history of psychedelics doesn't make me any more comfortable with the idea of psychedelics. So you talk about all these traditions and rituals, and for me, in my mind, that separates me even more from the idea of taking psychedelics. It's like, you know, it feels like an old notion. It's like they took these because they didn't know what they were actually doing to themselves, or they just came about this through chance. And of course, people who have almost like nothing to do compared to maybe like the modern day where, you know, there's like all this media entertainment, people are bored, or maybe not bored, but they have not much to do other than just survive. Psychedelics would be very enticing, and it would be this whole new experience. And you know, I can imagine them like tripping balls. But if I were to take it, for example, I could probably, I'm guessing here, but I could probably think, oh, like I could have had the same experience with CGI, or with CG, or with other experiences that can maybe emulate that. So this is all to say, um, it feels even more like an old notion the more you talk about it as a ritual in the past. And so I'm even more scared, or I'm even more turned off by the thought of using it, of using psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so I want to address like two aspects of the
Sure.
one is why we should be scared and not scared, but be very careful with psychedelics.
Right, doubtful, maybe, yeah.
And the second is the actual effects of psychedelics, if I could try to like describe it and like what the research has shown. Because I do think there is, as you said, we are, let's say, trained to have an adverse reaction to drugs and their effects, and generally. Yeah, so I'll address the first point about the threat of psychedelics. So you've mentioned people going crazy. That doesn't seem to be like a, let's say, like those, there are cases of things like serotonin syndrome, where people can have, let's say, prolonged trips, maybe lasting days, and confusion between reality and non-reality. But those seem to be like extremely rare, like in the culture of like all that research, or cultural use, let's say in the 60s and 70s, maybe one or two reported cases. And in terms of like toxicity or addictiveness, psychedelics consistently rank on the lowest in terms of addictiveness. Anything can be addictive, but it doesn't seem to cause a physiological dependence, like drugs, or like drugs like alcohol, tobacco, or like extreme cases, heroin. So on terms of like a body and survival level, it's like permanent effects on your brain, it seems to be very safe.
What about like PTSD from hallucinations? Does that happen at all?
Yeah, there are
Like
reports
trauma?
of, yeah. So people can have bad trips and experiences on these, let's say, psychedelic compounds. But you know, it can lead to two cases. One group of people might say that experience was really difficult, but it was what I needed to go through. And so in a way, it was healing. Or that experience was very scary and I'm not willing to go there again. I don't know to the extent of PTSD, if there's been cases of that, none that I've been aware of. So in general, and like I may be wrong about this, psychedelics compared to other drugs, like other common drugs like alcohol, like tobacco, and more commonly now opioids, are on the much safer side physiologically and psychologically. But that being said, I think there is a real danger to, let's say, the potential that these substances have. So I guess I'll talk about the effects of psychedelics too, because so there's been a kind of renaissance of psychedelic research in the past few years, led by a lot of researchers in Johns Hopkins. There's an organization called MAPS that is running, right now it's running phase 3 clinical trials for MDMA and its effects on post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it's multi-site around North America, Vancouver being one of the sites. And they're also, so they've had experiments with psilocybin, the active compound in psychedelic mushrooms, on smoking cessation. And it produced something ridiculous like 80% smoking cessation after 6 months, which is unheard of in smoking cessation drug research. And in terms of the general effects of psychedelics, you mentioned like the kind of woo-woo visuals and entertainment aspect of it, and you're right. It is
right.
It can be commonly used as, let's say, a party drug, and I think that's most people's perception of it. But there's a flip side to it where you can have a very internal and psychological experience. So there's this one venture capitalist whose podcast I listen to. His name is Kevin Rose. And he had a traumatic experience, well, when his father passed away, because his father had been kind of always abusive to him. I mean, not abusive to him, but he was a great father, spent a lot of good times with young Kevin Rose, but to his mother, he would always scream, and there seemed to be a very bad relationship, which Kevin Rose was kind of, let's say, traumatized by. And when his father died, he had a really tough time kind of sorting through the great memories of his father that he knew on a personal level, but the kind of father that he resented and hated when he saw him like treating his mother not in the best way. So he went to a therapist who specializes in taking people through, let's say, introspective psychedelic journeys, because one of the things that these substances that it seems allows people to do is to really bring out the aspects of their subconscious that they weren't even aware of, or that they weren't even thinking of, and to engage in a kind of conversation or dialogue with them. So that through that experience, Kevin Rose, he said he was speaking to his father, like memories of his father, the patterns of his father, and kind of talking to them more. And he was able to access memories of his mom once told him that like his father had a really tough like childhood growing up, and his dad was particularly abusive to him as well. So he was carrying a lot of that resentment, and that wasn't something that did like occurred to Kevin in his like day-to-day life, but it was something he was able to tap into under that experience. And he said it was a very like healing and restorative experience. So in certain conditions, like psychedelics can address, major mental health issues like PTSD, like depression, like addiction and addictions, which are very serious and complex psychological issues. But psychedelics seem to have the power to, let's say, kind of open the person up to a healing experience, if done in a safe and controlled and, say, assisted manner.
Right. Well, the perspective that I'm taking from you is psychedelics would be like just another tool, right? It's one of those arguments where you use it right, it can have some good effects. If you use it poorly, of course, you can have some negative outcomes as well. And I think that's completely valid. And it seems to me you're advocating for better research and less stigmatization, so that we can get to a point where we can use psychedelics as a tool, as a
Yeah.
means of helping people if possible. In which case, I'm on board. Like I would want to learn more about psychedelics and their potential. Maybe the more conservative side of me is saying, okay, well, maybe there's nothing there, or maybe it's so risky that it's not worth taking. It's not a risk worth taking. Maybe it works incredibly well in some people, but it also has the potential to be extremely detrimental to others, and we won't be able to figure out just who will benefit the most from these psychedelics. And so, for me, that risk is a tough one to take. It really is, and I would need a lot more convincing for me to take that risk. And it wouldn't come from like things like history or from cultural history. It would take pure science and some sort of evidence based approach to really convince me.
Right. And I think that is the right approach to take. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe you don't like hearing about the history, or it doesn't convince you more. And
No, it's interesting, but
yeah, but so I've kind of laid out the ancient history a little bit and our involvement with it. But to get
mhm.
into more of the recent history, so at the start of the 60s, there was a Swiss chemist called Albert Hofmann, and he was, while in his lab doing research trying to synthesize a new drug, he accidentally created LSD. And he was testing these compounds on himself to see the effects. And on a bike trip back from his lab to home, he started having this intense LSD trip. And he describes it as one of his like strangest experiences and strangest, most meaningful experiences of his life. And he kind of open sourced the recipe for that, so that other scientists could access it. And his only condition was that if you have a psychedelic experience, you gotta just send me back a report so that I can compile like research. But that ended up kind of leading to psychedelics going mainstream in the 60s. So it caused a kind of cultural revolution that people hadn't seen before. So the whole movement of hippies, um, um, all the major musicians like the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, and all their art and work, and all the hippies and their like talk of peace and love and in the background was the Vietnam War, right? So that was in part spurred by the discovery and proliferation of LSD. Um, and it represented kind of a major cultural shift. And that was really a golden era for new psychedelic research and experimentation. But there were some key events that happened that led to the immediate like shutting down of all psychedelic research, of all psychedelic use. So one was Charles Manson. He was a singer in the 60s, but he started a kind of LSD cult around his personality and the use of LSD. And him and his cult members went around and a string of murders happened around LA. So Charles Manson is known as a serial killer in LA. I think the death count was less than 10, but it was a significant event. And there was also Project MK Ultra, in which the U.S. government, they did experiments near McGill, I believe, where they took subjects kind of regardless of their consent, and placed them in sensory deprivation tanks and administered LSD. to see if they can have, let's say, mind control effects, or we don't know really what they were doing, but that's kind of a very malicious use of psychedelics. And that became the inspiration for shows like Stranger Things and
Right.
Phenomena.
Right.
But these two events in the late 60s led to the kind of conservative, I believe it was the Reagan government, classifying psychedelics as a Schedule I drug under their policies, which meant that it was on the same level of like heroin and those extreme opioids in terms of use. So, like, I do think there is a extremely, let's say, detrimental consequence to that can be had with psychedelics, because it's such a powerful tool. And one of my hypotheses is that, like, the Israelites, there's a reason why they contained it to, like, only the purest and holiest of the priests out of the tribe of priests can access, let's say if they had a psychedelic ritual, access it once a year, and it's like loomed in secrecy from the rest of the public. And there's other precautionary tales, I think, too. Like Pandora's box is, I think, one of them, or can allude to it. And there's this magical box containing, we don't know what, but curiosity, through curiosity, Pandora opens the box, and it leads to utter chaos in the world. I don't want to scare you further, but I've also heard stories that, or speculations that the Vikings may have used, the red cap, white spot mushroom. That's commonly known as a toxic mushroom, but it also has psychedelic properties. So the Vikings could kind of take that in their ritual and get themselves chanced into like a bloodthirsty state of mind. And when they used to raid other islands, they would just completely go berserk. And so, yeah, I'm probably not helping with in terms of destigmatizing it, but I'm saying there seems to be a real danger that people were keenly aware of, because kind of the effects I mentioned clinically are just barely touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of the experiences that people can have. And they seem to be very spiritual, and people call them transcendental for a reason, in nature. And whether we're morally and in terms of intellect prepared to take that on, or even use it as a tool, like, that's probably a big no, knowing how stupid and ignorant and how stupid and ignorant we are. So, but the thing is, it's out there. It's commonly used in the culture today, and we don't want to make the same mistake of mass unregulated kind of use in the 60s that led to kind of a freak out adverse reaction and shutting everything down. So I think we need to kind of peek at it very carefully, with a very kind of, like you said, a scientific, rigorous approach. Identify the situations, the limited situations where it can be genuinely therapeutic, and for people with severe mental disorders, I think it can be extremely life-changing. So that was my rant on psychedelics today.
I have I have hesitations. I think there's therapeutic potential for many drugs as well outside of psychedelics. Maybe they're less likely to be used because of their addictive properties, which you say psychedelics generally do not show. But yeah, I don't want to delve too much into it because I think you've made a strong case here, and I don't know enough to, accurately or sufficiently go against your claims specifically. So I think that is a good off. Thank you, audience, for listening. Thank you, June, for sharing the wonderful world of psychedelics. Hopefully, though, you will have updates in future weeks about the steps you want to take. You've obviously educated yourself a lot, and so you know what to do, or maybe you have an idea. So I look forward to seeing how this comes to be, and I'm in full support. Just as long as you're doing okay, as long as you're staying safe out there. Yeah. Anyway, close it off here. Thanks for listening.
See you next week.
Bye.